first thing that hit him wasn't the cold, but the smell, ozone and rot, like lightning had struck something dead. His breath hitched, every muscle locking as he stared at the empty crib in the center of the room. The only sound was a persistent, rhythmic scratching from inside the closet door. A primal dread took hold, rooting him to the sticky linoleum floor. Then, a whisper, so faint it seemed to come from the walls themselves. Daddy's home. But he wasn't the father. He was the babysitter, and the parents weren't due back for hours. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic scent of old iron, as the closet door began to inch open on its own. Paralyzed by the unknown, he realized the receipt in his pocket wasn't for payment. It was a receipt for a soul, and his week had just begun. It was the most mundane scrap of paper imaginable, yet it held the chilling evidence that my husband was indeed my son's biological father. My hands trembled uncontrollably, the paper's edge damp from my clammy touch. From another room, the sound of my son's innocent laughter drifted in, a stark and dissonant counterpoint to the dread coiling in my gut. The air in the room grew thick and stale, smelling faintly of old ink and dust, as the simple truth on that page rendered the world I knew a fragile lie. But to understand why that was a horrifying discovery, you have to understand the lie our entire life was built on. My name is Sarah. This is Leo. Leo was my entire world, and for years, I believed I was shielding him from a devastating truth. You see, his biological father was a man named David. Ours was a brief, incendiary relationship that burned out before I even knew I was carrying Leo. It ended in bitterness, leaving behind a secret that grew heavier with every passing year. David had severed all ties, signing away his rights, becoming a phantom in our lives. Sarah stared at his image on her phone one last time, her thumb hovering over the screen before finally deleting it. A faint scent of ozone and old paper lingered in the air, a ghost of what was. Then, I met Mike. Kind, steady, loving Mike. He walked into my life when Leo was 6 months old and chose us. He chose to be a father. He adopted Leo, gave him his last name, Anderson. We had built a beautiful life, telling young Leo that Mike was his, part daddy, a chosen father, a deeper magic. We truly believed it. Mike was his father in every way that mattered, but beneath that perfect surface, a different truth was waiting. Something ancient and hungry had been woven into our family's foundation. As Mike lifted his son Leo onto his shoulders, the image was one of perfect familial bliss. But the ghost of David? He was merely a footnote, a chapter they believed was permanently closed. But I was wrong. It all began with Leo's kindergarten medical forms. Sarah opened the letter from the pediatrician, the paper whispering as it parted, her brow furrowed, a subtle, instinctive knot of dread tightening in her stomach as her eyes scanned the first few lines. The form required a detailed family medical history, so I wrote, biological father's medical background, unknown, without hesitation. But those 2 words began to fester in my mind like a slow infection. What if that blank space wasn't just empty, but concealed something vital? A damp, metallic scent seemed to gather in the air as the question took root. The blue glow of her laptop screen was the only light in the sleeping room. With Mike asleep beside her, Sarah typed the name into the search bar, her fingers trembling. The search results loaded, and there it was. A wave of icy dread washed over her as she read the headline. I found David's obituary. He died in a car wreck 2 years earlier. A frigid, unsettling closure settled over me. Yet it birthed a new, grim obligation. I felt compelled to uncover the truth. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant ozone. A deep, gnawing dread took hold, and I knew I had to find out. For Leo, I hired a discreet service to trace any living relatives, purely for medical history. It took weeks of waiting in that quiet, uneasy anticipation. Then, the email arrived. Its subject line stark, genealogy report. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it, the air suddenly thick with the scent of old paper and dread. David had a sister living in Florida. I practiced that phone call countless times. Apologetic, clinical, brief. When I finally dialed, her voice carried an unexpected warmth. David's little boy? She said, the words hanging in the static-filled air. The words hung in the air like a physical weight, each syllable heavy with implication. David's certainty, the wrong timing, the mention of another man. All of it coalesced into a single, suffocating truth. Sarah's face went utterly slack, the muscles surrendering to the shock. In that vacuum of expression, you could almost smell the ozone of a life about to fracture. Her grip on the phone faltered as disjointed memories surfaced. The room seemed to warp, reality bending with the realization Mike was the serious one, the other man she'd been seeing when things weren't exclusive. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of old lies. Our dates had just begun, a pleasant blur of new experiences, then a sickening, vertiginous possibility cracked open in my mind. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic scent of ozone. What if David was right? In the dusty attic, Sarah's frantic hands tore through the memory box, her movements sharp with pain. Her fingers closed around a plastic stick. A positive pregnancy test, its faded lines still visible. Beside it, an old calendar lay open, a date circled in red ink that seemed to pulse in the gloom. I did the math, over and over, until the numbers blurred and the truth turned my stomach to ice. The weeks of pregnancy passed. each day a slow, creeping dread. I cross-referenced the dates I was with David against the dates I was with Mike. The numbers swam before my eyes. A sickening, metallic taste rising in my throat. It was a gray area, a fog of uncertainty that felt thick and suffocating. For 2 agonizing weeks, the terrifying possibility lingered. A narrow window of doubt, more unsettling than any certainty. I had clung for years to the belief that it was David. But now, a corrosive seed of uncertainty took root. This new suspicion, cold and invasive, began to unravel the fragile truth I had built my life upon. And in that moment, as Sarah watched Mike read to Leo at bedtime, the familiar scene curdled with a new, unspoken horror. I stared at Leo's profile, his laughter suddenly taking on a new, grotesque shape. My eyes, now desperate, scanned their faces with a frantic intensity. The specific curve of Leo's ear became a horrifying landmark I couldn't unsee, and that shared mannerism, the identical way their noses crinkled, froze the air in my lungs. Were these echoes of reality, or phantoms painted by my dread? I turned detective in the house we shared, now haunted by the man I cherished. The air grew thick with the scent of stale coffee and something metallic, like old pennies. I craved proof, not this corrosive suspicion gnawing at my bones. Proof was what she needed, and proof was what she would get. In a quiet, desperate ritual, Sarah stole Mike's toothbrush, its bristles still damp. A few clicks later, a discreet DNA paternity test was on its way, ordered from a shadowy corner of the internet. Days later, a plain brown box arrived, its unmarked exterior hiding the answer to a question that filled the air with a sickly, metallic dread. Her paranoia reached its zenith, flinching when Mike entered a room, dissecting his every syllable. The DNA test demanded a sample from Leo. I couldn't swab my son without explanation, and I couldn't ask Mike. To pose the question would be an accusation. It would shatter everything, regardless of the answer. Then my eyes locked onto something protruding from Leo's daycare backpack. I pulled out the receipt, my fingers tracing the damp, textured paper. My gaze fell to one line item, and the air in the room seemed to thicken. A family tree project. The words hung in the silence, heavy with implication. The teacher's note was casual. Non-toxic paint, might need to wash. But on Leo's 4-year-old palm, a faint, dry blue smear lingered. My fingers brushed it. A gritty, flaking texture that wasn't paint. It came from his own skin cells, and the air suddenly tasted of ozone and dread. Sarah's hand trembled as the cotton swab collected dried paint from Leo's sleeping fingers, her violation complete when she sealed the evidence. She then swabbed Mike's coffee mug from the dishwasher, the ceramic feeling cold and accusing under her touch. Each sample felt like stealing secrets from those she loved, the air thick with ozone and betrayal. I sent the tests away, their fate now bound to whatever truth would return in those envelopes. The weight stretched into an eternity. Looking at Mike, my partner, my rock, I felt like a traitor living under his roof. When the email arrived, my breath hitched, the air suddenly thick with ozone. My fingers moved of their own accord, clicking the message open. The paternity test result glowed on the screen. 99.99% probability. Mike was Leo's biological father. Relief washed over him, immediate and profound. Then, a crushing dread seized his chest. The air grew thick, tasting of ozone and stale dust. Mike was Leo's father, which meant he had known all along. A memory surfaced, a faint, metallic scent of blood, a whispered secret in a shadowed hallway. His breath hitched, trapped in his throat. The truth wasn't a revelation. It was a confession he'd been carrying, and its weight now threatened to bury him. He must have calculated it himself, all those years back. He knew the terrible possibility existed the very moment we met, and he never uttered a single word. He let me shoulder the crushing guilt, the entire story of the ghost father. He let me believe a lie that painted me as the sole keeper of a painful secret. In the dim living room, Sarah finally confronted Mike. She didn't shout. Her voice was a low, measured monotone that carried a metallic edge, like old coins. This eerie calm was far more terrifying than any scream. It was the quiet before a storm that had already broken inside her. Sarah silently placed the daycare receipt and the printed DNA results on the coffee table. Her voice was a near whisper in the heavy air, thick with the scent of old paper and brewing coffee. The supply fee for the family tree project. That's how I got his DNA. Then, the question that stripped the room bare. Why did you never tell me you knew? Mike's face didn't register confusion. It collapsed. It's the look of a man whose most carefully guarded secret has finally clawed its way to the surface. Mike's voice cracks, heavy with the weight of confession. I was afraid. When we met, you were so certain it was David. You had constructed this entire narrative. And I loved you with such terrifying, desperate intensity. I feared that questioning those dates would make you think I was calling you a liar, that I didn't trust you. So I chose the cleaner path, to be the father who simply chose him, without digging into the truth. Sarah's voice cut through the stillness, sharp with betrayal. You let me live with that lie. The weight of her words hung in the damp air, thick with the scent of old paper and distant decay. Sarah's voice cut through the damp air, sharp and brittle. We built our family on it. Mike's reply was a low, guttural plea, the scent of ozone lingering. I built our family on us, on loving you, Unloving Leo, the biology didn't matter to me. A sticky dread settled between them. The only sound, the frantic scratching of a branch against the window. It mattered to me. Sarah's whisper was raw, clawing at the silence. Her final words were a hiss, carrying the iron tang of a secret too long buried. It was my truth to know. The family fractured across separate couches, the house thick with unspoken accusations. You didn't protect us, Mike. You patronized us. A metallic scent of old rain hung in the air. The only movement, the slow drip from the kitchen tap. The man I loved wasn't who I thought he was. He wasn't the noble stepfather who rescued us. He was the biological father who concealed the truth to cement his position. A lie of omission, woven into the very foundation of our supposed love. Now, we sit in counseling, the air thick with the scent of ozone and unresolved rot. Some days, watching him read to Leo, I glimpse the man I fell for. Others, I face a stranger who expertly curated a truth that wasn't his to keep. Sarah picks up the crumpled daycare receipt, smoothing its creases on the counter. The paper feels cold and brittle under her fingers. She looks out the window. Mike pushes Leo on a swing in the fading afternoon light, their laughter muffled by the glass. Narrator. So here's my question for you. What truly matters? The raw, jagged truth, no matter how it shreds the fabric of reality, or the carefully stitched story, the only thing keeping a family from unraveling completely? We were sold the fairy tale, the pristine, perfect ending, where the husband was, indeed, the father all along. But fairy tales have a scent, not of magic, but of ozone. The sharp, electric tang left after a lie has been struck. And the truth? It feels like the cold, damp soil you find when you finally dig up the garden to see what's really been buried there. But the cost was our trust, a currency now spent. And I don't know if this receipt is proof of a miracle, or a tally for the price of our honesty. The damp paper felt cold and slick against my skin, smelling faintly of ozone and old ink. Every scratch of pen on its surface echoed like a whispered accusation in the quiet room. A primal dread took hold, freezing the air in my lungs. Was this slip of paper a divine ledger entry, or the final invoice for our fractured integrity? The screen fades to black. Text appears. What would you have done?